Hello, and welcome back to Butting Heads. I'm Adam, and today with me, it's as always Chris, and we have quite the topics today. We have the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. We have possible fourth rounds of stimulus checks coming, and we have Dave Rubin and Glen Beck's impressive investigation as to what what lifting of the masks by the CDC really means. But today we're going to start off with Israel and Palestine. So just yesterday, Is- Israel and Hamas signed a ceasefire with each other, or agreed to a ceasefire with each other, that ended the almost 2 week long conflict of them actively engaging with each other. Uh, in that time, there was,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. There's a ceasefire. And I heard someone talking the other night, and I heard something that just I think it this is really what happened here. And it's sort of like maybe you'll be in a bar or something, and two dudes get into a fight, and one guy is just whooping the other guy, and people are trying to break it up, and he's just punching him, and eventually you're just done. And it's not that anyone really broke up the fight, it's more that you were just done beating the crap out of the other guy. And
I
that's sort of like the situation that I see here. What do you think, Adam?
I actually kind of agree with that. So like, if you like actually were like looking at like Israeli politics at the time, weeks leading up to like this conflict, there was like an amalgamation of like anti-Netanyahu parties forming together in order to like actually make a winning coalition, pretty
Yeah.
much just to out like Likud and like their government. Um,
Sure.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it seems that like throughout this conflict, because like something that Israelis like very much value, one of the more like right leaning or like Netanyahu adjacent parties that were part of the super coalition, I think decided to like that it was probably better for them to like get behind Netanyahu because unfortunately during these times like we said last week of how like Hamas and like Likud actually somewhat need each other because they both justify each other's
Yeah.
existence.
Sure.
The Israeli voter base. You know how Americans always talk about the economy? Well, for Israel, like it's a their major issue is security. And in times of like elevated strife, elevated stress, like who just wins with the security because they're just beating the drum. And so,
And I think also it brings up a point, like this is a common tactic that you see when politicians get in trouble. They decide to have an enemy and then go kill the enemy and go conquer them and go whoop them up, and then, oh my God, he led us through, and the evil dragon was slayed, and their poll numbers always go up. We saw this with Bill Clinton. When he was getting impeached, he just randomly bombed a Sudanese pharmaceutical factory that supplied all the tuberculosis vaccines. But apparently, there were terrorists hiding in there. But long story short, there weren't any terrorists in there. It was a manufacturing plant. But long story short, you do that while you're getting impeached, and it raises your poll numbers to just bomb someone. I think we saw an attempt to try and do that with Donald Trump when he bombed and killed General Soleimani
Money, yeah,
during his
impeachment
impeachment.
trial.
And so I think if I actually took the time to really sit and see this, I think we would see a lot of cases that in desperate times it's easy to just start throwing bombs out there to get your poll numbers up.
Because it's a big national like distraction. Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
and
like,
and you look like a hero. There obviously it has to be
and
under the guise
honestly,
that
like
you're defeating an enemy.
with and like honestly with like all of, like the strikes that like the IDF were doing, it was definitely, these were all like pre-planned strikes that like they knew like a while ago and were just like waiting to like go in. Like
Yeah.
they were just like waiting for the first rockets to fly and just like they're like, okay, we know the targets that we're hitting. We know where the supply. We know where their people are. Okay, we can get them.
Yeah. And the bombing of the Associated Press building, like I have so many feelings about that.
Yeah.
But you start off before I weigh in on that.
No, you can go in with the
All
AP.
right. Well, there's like so many ways like I feel about this. Like on one hand, like yo, this guy is he's getting hit with corruption charges. He's losing his grip. I'm talking about
Yeah.
Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. He's losing his grip. And so yeah, it just sort of makes sense to actually, you know,
Journalists. Is that?
yeah, with the journalists, you're just basically bombing the journalists that are sort of supposed to be there, like being the watchdog against you. And also at the same time, too, though, there's this other perspective of, I think I've seen a little bit of this. They bomb the Associated Press, and it's almost sort of like internationally, journalists seem to pay more attention to it now, or not necessarily that, but I've seen a little bit more of now journalists maybe could take this more seriously as an aggressive attack because of you're bombing an Associated Press building. What do you think?
Um, I don't think in terms like I think you could definitely see like you probably would see more like and I'll start with your second point where like journalists are now
Yeah,
starting to take this more
yeah,
seriously. I don't necessarily in terms of like their written work they're taking it more seriously, but maybe on Twitter they're kind of just like using it as like because it is part of their identity, right? Like that could theoretically be an office in which they worked at that just got bombed. I feel like that may be like where you would see like journalists on Twitter being like, well, that's pretty bad.
well, I did feel like I've seen a few stories from a few outlets that are historically more on the Israel side of things, who maybe can say, listen, from their perspective, they would say, listen, there's things on both sides, but let's look and see what they're doing wrong here. They bombed the mosque, they killed some children, they destroyed the Associated Press building. It's like, I don't know, like maybe I'm just cynical, but I just hope that's not a
I don't think that's it. Um, like it could be true of maybe like some outlets, but like I think in terms of like how it's typically covered, it's pretty fine. Like, or
and
it's
just and yeah, and I think also another part of this is that on just another note, and I'll concede to you about the journalism thing. Okay, it's just more of like a theory.
mm-hmm.
But I also think at the same time, it's like they said there was Hamas in the building, and really a lot of reports contradict that there really wasn't. And even if there was, isn't that just a guise to then destroy any building, anything,
So
anywhere, because Hamas could or couldn't be there?
you're kind of right. In terms of like, so the only like according to the IDF, they were fairly certain that Hamas was there. Honestly, it's possible. Hamas has been known to like put in like maybe like put in like a lot of like effort, like a lot of their communications, a lot of their bases in civilian areas. This is where like the criticism of oh Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields comes from. But that's mainly because like mainly like Hamas's main weapon against Israel is like the court of public opinion and just like literally showing off like see how like terrible Israel is because in terms of firepower Hamas is never winning against Israel.
Yeah, yeah,
But like if they are like okay, we can limit what Israel can do or at least like make them look super bad so that way they have no allies or at least like reduce the amount of like international allies.
yeah,
That's where like the criticism of like human shields comes from. Like
yeah,
and so like it
yeah,
is possible that they did have it. If not,
But what
oh,
does
that's
that
going to
mean?
be
They
like a
were
huge
in
debacle.
there, they were working there, or they
It's
were just hiding in a broom closet in the
no, they
Associated
probably
Press?
had no, they probably had like it's very possible that like so for instance, it was like a huge building, right? People who live in like if you ever like worked in like a huge like office building, you don't know every single company that's in there, so it's very possible that the AP didn't know that there was like a Hamas organization in there. Like it could have been like a communication company. It could have been like or that does like intelligence or like sends out messages for Hamas. Um,
Yeah.
Personally,
I,
I think it's a complete fucking like they probably shouldn't have done that in terms of like if you only cared about optics and not like, about like airstrike like that probably wasn't the best move on like Israel's part.
no, it
Um,
wasn't. And I think we
neither were
do
like
see the
yeah,
people's opinions changing.
exactly like um in the court of public opinion like it's weird because I'm not really saying that any other civilian casualty because like I'm against like the civilian casualties, but like it's like for that one, like it's like, ooh, you had to have known what you were doing, like, or you
Yeah,
had to have known that like
yeah,
there's no way that was worth the risk. Like I don't,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but like, hey,
But
you know what? Like,
another point that I just wanted to get to tonight, and we talked a little bit about this beforehand, but I think we see a lot of like arguing about like a two-state solution and a one-state solution.
mhm.
And there's almost this idea that if you're for a two-state solution, oh, you just don't know the history, you just don't understand the problems, you didn't read enough of the books, get educated, you'll realize that this is a colonial state, and then you'll know you want a one-state solution. And so I do realize it is a colonial state, at least for me. I'm not speaking for Adam, and me and Adam have differing politics. That's why this is called butting heads. But for me, I mean, I see Israel as a colonial state that is militarily occupying the Palestinians and really just dominating these people and committing war crimes and human rights abuses. So it's wrong. But at the same time, so I'm as radical as almost anybody about Palestinian freedom. And I don't think it makes anyone any less of any less of a, a just, or you're not morally incorrect to say that like you prefer a two-state solution. So I know Adam has a slightly different maybe way of looking at the Israel-Palestine situation than me, but just what are your thoughts on the one state,
um,
two-state solution thing?
so yeah, okay. I just want to like clarify when you say like Israel's like a colonial state, do you mean it's like because like okay, I'm only asking this because I've heard people call it like a colony of like the United Kingdom and the United States of America, which I think is wrong. Um, but
Um,
do you mean
yeah,
colonial state as in
basically,
they're like currently like in like the way that they're like having their occupation, as in like they're
yeah,
actively
so
engaging in like some form of like colonization? Because I would agree with
yes, yes,
I would
yes,
agree with that.
yes.
Okay.
They're actively engaging in colonization, and so
Yeah.
you can literally on every issue when there's some sort of Israeli crime in any fashion, it's like I am so much against that. And
Hmm.
I'm even more on this when people want to just compare Hamas to okay, you can call them terrorists and we can call the IDF terrorists and we can call a lot of people terrorists, but I'll even talk about like you can't just compare Osama bin Laden and people who fly planes into the World Trade Center to people who are fighting for their freedom. And I know me and Adam disagree on that, but like I'm trying to tell our listeners my general position. Like
Yeah.
I'm really in on this Palestinian freedom thing, but I actually just think it's more the world would be a better place if there was a two-state solution for many reasons. One, that there is a one state right now, and it leads to Palestinian people being occupied. So I mean, you're just going to say you're going to bring democracy there, but of course, democracy existed in the 1800s when black people were slaves in America. So you just think you're going to make one state and turn it into democracy, and now all of a sudden, like, Palestinians are going to have like equal rights under the law and have power. And I just don't see a parliament. I just don't see a parliament where there's some Israeli politicians and some Palestinian politicians. Actually, I mean, you guys think Republicans and Democrats are bad. You're favoring
True.
putting all these people in the same parliament as
True.
each other, and I'm not and
True.
I'm not for freedom enough because I don't agree with that. Like, to me, that's just crazy. And I want Palestinians to have their own country and their own laws. And also, I think the borders should go back to where they were before, like, when Israel was originally created and when they originally and that's just a messed up situation, by the way, how the UN just circles a spot on the map
Well, okay,
that
that
people are
was that
living in and
was
says
that was
that's now
based upon an
Israel.
agreed upon line between Israel and Jordan after a year of conflict, of like an actual war for independence. Like that
Well,
green
okay,
line
the
does have
borders of
like
Israel
some.
have changed, and so I believe the borders should be. And there's people who are more knowledgeable than me about this. Probably our good friend Pat O'Connor. He would be able to really tell me the border situation across time. But the borders wouldn't be the current borders. The borders would be what they were maybe in the 50s, something back then. But one excuse people say is, what about all the settlements? What about all the settlements that they built beyond those original borders into this territory? What would you do then? So the simple solution really is this, and people make this why you can't do a two-state solution, because there's settlements. And so how would that work? You can't do that. And so it's as simple as this:
Land swaps.
anyone living on a settlement just becomes part of Palestine, and you can either sell your home and move if you don't want that, or you can continue living there and live your life. And I don't see why that's so crazy, and why that's such a barrier to giving Palestinians a country and dignity, a country that can trade, a country that can produce things, a country that can use the water and the rivers, and that can use the Mediterranean Sea along the Gaza Strip. I mean, an actual country, which it's not today. And so, yeah, Adam, I've been talking for a while, but I'll pass the buck to you.
Yeah, so when it comes to like one state versus two state, I'm sympathetic to like people who say like one state solution. But at the same time, like the world doesn't exist in a void. Ideally, yeah, you'd probably want like a one state solution. Personally, for me, I'm for open borders. Like I'm for elimination of borders. So really, I'd like the no state solution. But in terms of like the one state solution, that probably doesn't work because I literally I don't think that like it would be a good deal for like the Israeli for like Israeli Jews. A lot of these like a lot of like the population of Israel like really boosted up from like being refugees from various pogroms that like existed in like Arab states like between like 1948 and like the 60s. Um, so like it's not necessarily like Israel's filled with European Jews. They're filled with like a lot of like Jews from like Arab states that went there in order to like escape persecution and were very poor, not able to like hold like wealth
Sure.
or like have houses. So and I honestly I do think that there probably does need to be some Jewish state in a way. I think if
Well,
there's
why can't you put the Jewish state in Beverly Hills, California,
well, there's already
where
it's
all
already the state of Israel right now, right? We're not talking about creating a new one, right? We're talking about the already existing one. We're not gonna
Okay, yeah, I
change
guess
people.
that's more of an argument about the origins of it
Yeah,
anyway. Of course, you're
like
going to give away other people's land so people can have a sanctuary where they can be safe from anti Semitism, but you're never going to give away your own land where people can have a sanctuary. to be safe from anti-Semitism. So like, that's not the argument for
I mean, this
today.
this goes into again like there was like a war for independence. That like again was like a lot of rhetoric at the time was literally killing Jews, like
And
push them out into the sea was like literally like the
and
words, and like a lot of this has been like repeated within like Hamas's like actual charter that still doesn't recognize Israel as a state and like oftentimes vilifies Jews. That's probably like one of the main reasons why like Jews will become the minority in the state, and like for the Jews living there, I don't know. I don't know if they
but
would
like,
exactly be protected.
but it's not like so. I mean, I'm for a two-state solution, so therefore I do. That must mean that I do respect like some form of like an Israeli state,
Yeah,
right?
you do. No,
But at the
I'm not
same
suggesting that
time,
you aren't.
but well, I'm just saying at the same time though, I can completely understand why someone says, "Listen, it was sort of just an like it was sort of just an area picked out by the countries who won World War One, and you're shaking your head, so that's maybe something you disagree with. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed at the end of World War One, and sort of how that territory was broken up, and I think this happened like from just listening to Pat talk about it, Israel didn't just start like in 1948.
No.
It was a thing that built up over time, but originally, yeah,
Yeah.
there was just land circled out on a map. Like, what is wrong with that perspective?
Because it was more so a voluntary movement by like individuals. This wasn't necessarily too promoted by like the British. The British have a very tenuous history in terms of it. Like a lot of people will point towards the Balfour Declaration and say, well, Part 4 of the Balfour Declaration calls for like a Jewish state. And so the United Kingdom was for forming the British state and mandated Palestine. That's uh, not necessarily true. Like how Britain defined that Jewish state seems to like vary by like politician to politician of the time. Some people would think that like Brooklyn would be like a Jewish state because it has like a large concentration of Jews. That's like one reason. That's like one way that like people thought of like the Jewish state to be. Other people thought like there was also various policies that like restricted like for instance the white papers of 1939 that like restricted travel of Jews to like the Palestinian area. Like this was mostly done through like Zionist movements at the time, and when I say Zionist movement, I mean like the actual Zionist movement, not like the slur that people throw around today that means like almost next to nothing now because people just misuse that word.
Hmm.
In which like a lot of people like a lot of individual citizens literally moved to Palestine, left their homes, and like bought land off of like the feudal lords of the old Ottoman Empire, set up like community farms. I think they were called like kibbutz or whatnot, and there were like communal farms in which like that was like pretty much like the first settlers in like the United Kingdom days. There was originally like already movements and immigration patterns that started like back in like the 19th century.
Okay.
So like I think like
Okay.
so like when people say like oh well this was just circled on a map by like England and whatnot, it was more so just like it really neglects how there was like voluntary travel. It wasn't by like the Jewish people to go to that area. It wasn't necessarily too promoted, or if it was at various points in like the history leading up to it, and like that only like the 30 years in which like Britain had it. But
But it's just sort of amazing, and I guess I didn't mean to get into this debate, but it would just be amazing to me how I guess if that happened here in America, where someone sort of slowly came and then took off a piece and then sort of ends up Now they militarily occupy the original people who were there.
So
Like,
so
just sort of like, so I believe in a two-state solution and in Israel, but it's like I can see someone who says, like, come on, like, that's just crazy. That's just crazy.
so like at like
And people need a sanctuary, but don't use the fact that people need a sanctuary from anti-Semitism to go give away somebody else's
but
land.
it wasn't given away. It
Right.
wasn't given away.
How, Adam,
There
how
was
is
no
it even
state.
recognized? So
There was literally a war for independence. This was a treaty that was like signed.
so if that
That
happened in
between
America, it would
Jordan,
just be like,
between
yeah, that's
Jordan,
actually.
yes.
I mean, that's just to be consistent. If it can happen there and it's okay, so then
Okay, so
something
like
like that
here's
can
what
happen
happened.
here.
Here's what happened. Okay, so let's say for instance, a lot of people like because like really this is really starting to sound like an anti-immigration argument, like you're kind of going down, and I know you're pro-immigration. So
Of course.
yes. So let's say, for instance, a lot of Mexicans come over and they go into Texas. They all buy land, right?
Sure.
All of a sudden, the state of Texas just dissolves. It like secedes from like the United States and just like dissolves into itself. And for a year,
It just
those Mexican,
dissolves. There's no NABCA. There's no NABCA. There's no anything like that. It just dissolves. There's not an ethnic cleansing of people beforehand. It just dissolves. Because that's the part. So then you want to say, well, then they ethnically cleansed people, and then you know what I mean? There's a lot more to throw in than that. It just
I mean, there were
dissolves. So
refugees
we're
on both
saying, would
sides.
that be
Yes.
the right thing to do?
No.
No. Of course, I welcome
So
immigration. Are you going to come here and ethnically cleanse people and
Jesus
create your
Christ.
own
No. Okay.
state?
So there
Like,
was no, like, under the British Mandate of Palestine, there was legal transfer of land and property to Jewish people in which they created those farms. Unfortunately, the Britain kind of fucked off before any actual solution was like even proposed, before like there was any good partition of Palestine or anything. There was a lot of trouble and in the British that was happening there. They were facing opposition from both Arab and Jewish terrorist groups or freedom fighter groups, however you want to call it. It was just becoming a debacle, and England just wanted to like amscray as soon as possible. And unfortunately, when they left, there was no actual like set state there at the time. And so that's when the Jewish League pretty much took like, which were pretty much like in Tel Aviv at the time, declared the state of Israel. And for over a year, there was a conflict, and the Jews did pretty well. And eventually, they moved up to a territory, and Israel and like Jordan came to an agreement. And
all
Jordan
right,
was one of the
yo,
major areas at the time. So, like for instance, like there's also like if you want to talk about like why are certain countries of the way, like the original Palestine mandate also included like parts of like Jordan and Lebanon, but then they were like all of a sudden split up into like Jordan and Lebanon. So like,
all right. You know what, Adam? I didn't know we were going to be talking about this beforehand. So, and you know what? I'm not even the one you should be debating with. I think for this, there is one more thing about the Israel-Palestine thing I do want to get to. You clearly do know your history really well. I think you and Pat do have to do a debate on this because I don't think he would agree with that. And dude, this kid just has so many notes in his covering his whole room about every little month of every year between 1890 and now. So well, I think it would be good for people to listen to two sides on that. I don't think I'm really the guy for right now, but there is one more point that
oh wait, I
I did
feel like
want
I
to.
never really made up my point about like what the two-state solution.
Yeah. So all right. Yeah. So do you want to just quickly circle back
Yeah, yeah,
around on
no.
that?
Okay, so these are like two ethnic groups. Like unfortunately, these are two ethnic groups that have very much hostilities with each other. Both sides don't want to live with each other. The only people who want like that's the unfortunate reality. Maybe in like 200 years we can have a one-state solution of like a full-on like Palestine and whatnot. But I think if you really want to get to a one-state solution, you have to start with the two-state solution. Have Gaza and the West Bank unified into a singular Palestine that's its own state that can start trading, maybe even build relationships with Israel as well. And that way they can help improve them. We can stop the stupid blockade that's Israel has been put onto Gaza itself.
Yeah. And there just needs to be justice.
Yeah,
Like, we know
exactly.
what it looks like. We know what it looks like. Y- y-
Yeah,
you know, you can't always describe it. You know it when you see it. And you know what? I think the whole Israel-Palestine, we're definitely going to be doing more about this. So if that's something that interests you, definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also yeah, maybe
follow
add
us
us
on
on
Spotify
Spotify, or
or wherever
yeah.
your
But
podcasts are heard.
I think for the sake of brevity, we should continue into our next topic, which I believe is the um,
Stimulus.
there's a proposal for a second
So
round.
the Ways of Means Committee, which is known as like one of like the top committees, like most respected committees in like the House of Representatives,
Right, that's
seven.
Neera Tanden, right?
No,
Oh, no, no, no.
no,
That's
that's in the
okay,
House of
yeah, no, no.
Representatives.
It's within it's
It's
within
a
the
House
House
run
of
committee.
Representatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The seven Democrats on that committee signed a letter to like Joe Biden insisting on like a new round of stimulus payments that to be included within like the American Family Plan.
Yeah. And so yeah, so this is like one of the issues that like I'm just so passionate about. And this is the reason why like I've read all these books, and I took all those courses in college. It really honestly, it's issues like this is what politics is just about for me. And I just want to share something with some of you who are listening. Just I had a professor one time tell me something so profound that I know even if I'm not going to explain it as well, but even if I can just give you a quarter of what he gave to me that day, I feel like I'll accomplish something. So the thing about these stimulus checks is is it comes back to this like original philosophy that you have about economics. And I had a professor just explain to us that, and so one, it's economically or it's academically accepted that the way you measure an economy overall, like what does it boil down to? And so Adam, actually, you know what, before I get into that, let me propose like a question to you. If
Okay.
I give you $1 million and I tell you you can't spend it, are you any more wealthy?
No.
No, because measurement of your wealth is the things you have, and it's everything in your life, from when you turn on the shower and hot water comes running down, or you get in your beat up old car and you drive it to the supermarket, or you order a pizza to have someone deliver it to you. And really, someone who can turn on a shower, order a pizza, and drive their car, and what he explained to us that day was that you are wealthier than the richest person in Mesopotamia or Babylon, because of course you can take an Advil and get rid of a headache. You can so the economy is measured not by what you produce. GDP, yes, that is something that gives you an insight for it. But really, the ultimate thing, you use GDP to try and figure out how is people's quality of life and how is people's well-being. And that's ultimately, like, you can look at the ancient Egyptian pyramids, and they produced these great, I mean, science can't even explain how they actually build these. They produced it, but wait,
I know.
the pyramids don't produce any happiness for the people for the most part. And it was used, they used slave labor to build the pyramids. So you can measure production all you want. They produced, but but really that's just a proxy to try and estimate how happy people are. And so, why am I saying this? Because when we're talking about stimulus checks, yeah, people can talk to you about the GDP, and they can talk to you about the savings rate, and they can throw all these little measurements at you. But the one thing you can't measure is the happiness of people and the well being of people. And so I think when you truly measure an economy the way it should be measured, the way Paul Krugman knows it should be measured, the way academic society agrees that it should be measured, that is how you measure it. And so I think just from that standpoint alone, you have to say that these stimulus checks are good for the economy. So I'll pass it to you, Adam. I know I just talked for a while. Your thoughts on the stimulus checks?
Um, they're fine. I think usually they're good. They're good until like people try to like veto the entire bill over them. Um, so I think
What?
that for instance, for instance, so like I support like as a broader policy, I think in the future we probably need to have some UBI into this country. Um,
Well,
should
well,
probably
let me ask you
happens.
this. Let me ask you this. The so if you were king, or just even just looking at past stimulus checks, the three that we've had,
Yeah.
was this good? I mean, this was a net
So
positive for
okay, yeah,
America,
you're right.
considering the amount we spent,
There,
factoring that in, that you had to
I don't
also
care about
give
I
to
don't
get.
care about the spending.
So
I
if you
don't care
don't care
about the
about the
spending.
spending, then how can someone like Paul, how can people, someone like Paul Krugman, who spent
I
his
thought
whole life
I
advocating for stimulus checks, there's people on the left who now point to these arguments that, oh, we got to be more careful about these
I
stimulus checks.
okay.
I mean,
What was the recent thing that Krugman said on I thought
well,
like
I
Krugman's
mean,
like
not
thing on
recently.
stimulus
It was
checks is that they were like too small to really make too much of an impact.
I've heard, and I hope I'm not
That's
mis.
that's all I know that
From
that he's
Krugman
saying.
himself, because I believe,
Yeah.
no, I've seen a lot of people on the left telling me that, oh, because people are taking the checks and they're saving them, and people don't need these checks, and what we're doing is we're just spending trillions of dollars and it's just going to Jeff Bezos because
Um.
people are just buying packages, and
Okay.
it's just a bunch of
So
elitists. I see a lot of
I
elitist
hey, you
garbage
know
about
what? I
this.
was kind of like one of those. I was one of those people who said that during the last round of stimulus when they were threatening to hold up the entire stimulus package that included like the vaccination rollout, tax credits, and like other forms that were probably more pressing than and
Well, I
UBI
mean,
and like uninsurance and like insurance.
and
That's I
there
like.
was an argument made by Paul, I believe it was Paul Krugman. I'll have to go back and check, but by at least someone extremely, extremely on the level of a Paul Krugman,
Okay.
saying that, just talking about things that don't matter, like, oh, and people are saving it, or people don't need it. But of course, Paul Krugman knows that 40% of America makes what's considered low wages or under $30,000 a year. So 40% of America, it's not minimum wage, but 40% of America makes uh, under $30,000 a year. And also another thing, I did look up some polls before we talked about this. Um, I saw a Pew poll that said 70% of Americans favor
Yep.
a stimulus check, and I saw another poll where Politico worked with someone who does polls, so it's not like some kind of Fox News poll where they just put on their website, which is obviously unscientific. Politico worked with someone to come out with a poll, and that poll found that 9 out of 10 Democrats support stimulus checks, and 2 out of 3 Republicans support stimulus checks. So,
No, they're
I mean,
good politics.
about the point of where Paul Krugman can say, this is our money, this isn't his money, this is what we want, so, you know, You
So
don't matter. It doesn't matter what you say if you want it, if you think it's a good idea, if you think it's a bad idea, because we want this and it's our money. And you can give money to Israel for military and bombs. You can give money to Saudi Arabia. But the second you give money to a regular working person in America, now all of a sudden like people are going to have a problem with that. The buck does not stop. So wait, we can hand out all this money, we can spend $1 trillion a year. It's just a people are going to make fiscal responsibility arguments talking about these stimulus checks, and it just enrages me. And like, this is why I get into politics. What do you think just in terms of that, like?
So I think maybe like the Steelman Krugman, like I don't like I find it hard to believe that Krugman is 100% against stimulus checks to people who need it. I feel like to people who make the savings argument, they would be like kind of like your professor saying, if you're $1 million richer and you're not spending the money, are you really richer? That would be like maybe like, so who are the people who are saving the money, and can we maybe give the people who need more money, or
All I'm
who
gonna
need the money, more money?
Yeah, I
If
mean, but dude, it's crazy. No, because I'll see stuff on like CNBC. I'll see clips from CNBC, the financial news channel, that most of you are probably familiar with. They'll show a McDonald's with the line out the door, one worker at the cash register, and they'll say, no, these stimulus checks and these unemployment payments. And I've actually seen the specific argument about stimulus checks where they say these stimulus checks, now people get their stimulus check and now they don't go to work, and that's why there's a line out the door, which is just God
that's not
forbid.
true.
How about tax cuts in the 60s with Kennedy, major tax cuts in the 80s with Reagan. You had more tax cuts with Bush 1. You had capital gains tax cuts with Clinton. You had more tax cuts with George W. Bush. You had the largest corporate tax cut in human history, as I believe I heard Trump or one of his people call it. And now a $1,400 check to somebody. That's the reason why there's a line at the McDonald's and there's one worker standing there. That is just so elitist.
Yeah,
That is just so demented that they just ignore decades of history of deregulation, of all that kind of thing. And they're going to point to a $1,400 check that people got. That's why that's an issue now? Like, ah.
yeah, I agree. People who say that, they're just complete clowns. That's it. Like, I feel like if anything though, I'm only thinking because like for instance, like I'm not necessarily to like rah. Like I'm okay with the stimulus checks, they're fine. But like usually like in the bills that they were like associated with, like they were just okay. Like they weren't like the parts of it that would get like the attention. Like for instance, like I think the
And what do
expanded.
you mean by that?
I mean, like for instance, like the expanded unemployment insurance. That's a much bigger part of the bill. I mean, ensuring that like states have funds for vaccination, or that like state and local budgets can function for the next year, so that way those programs, state-run programs, don't get messed over, right? These are vastly more important than just like $1,400.
Those things are all absolutely extremely important, but I guess I just don't get the connection between. So this is the perfectly
No,
right
no,
and
no, no,
just
no. So
thing to
like
do.
this is I'm advocating for why not both, right? For like
Yeah.
yes, that this isn't either or. However, this does become like either or when, for instance, like when Trump with the second round of tax cuts was like, oh God, this stimulus, this is such a small amount. How about we trim unnecessary fat so that way we can get people more money? Wouldn't that be great?
No,
And then
that's
people were
not.
like
No.
literally
So
like
I'm with
talking,
you.
yeah, right.
No, this is our money. It's our democracy. You work for us. You give. We want a stimulus check. We want an increase in unemployment checks, and we want the money to Israel. for their bombs that they're going to drop on kids, and the money to Saudi Arabia that they use to funnel terrorism around the world. We want that to stop, and we want the money to us to come. And there's no way that the second we get that, decades of tax cuts are just completely. So they lower the corporate tax from 35 to 21%. And so that's 14 points. That's that's monumental. And you're telling me the second you hand a regular dude who just does a 9 to 5 a $1,400 check, that's what like is blowing up the economy? Oh my God. That is just wrong. That is just wrong. I think I've said all I need to say about that. And any last words from you?
Uh, Really nothing more than like what I already said. Like, stimulus checks are good on average. My mind was somewhat changed by them, or at least like not necessarily changed by them, but more like just looking at the data between like the second and third round. They seem to be going to like most of it seems to be going off to like paying off debt and like paying for like food and groceries. So the idea of like the McDonald's lines or like people just spending unnecessary, actually even if people spent unnecessarily or on things that they want, that's good because you don't want luxury industries to freaking die either.
I
Like
mean,
that's the point of
it
the
really
stimulus.
doesn't matter.
Like honestly, so long as
Right.
like you're spending that money, like that's what the stimulus check is for. Like spend that money.
It's like, oh
Like
no,
like even if
somebody
people like
got a
spent it on
stimulus
like a
check and
lobster
didn't
debt.
spend it.
Yeah, like seriously, like honestly, if people like went out and got like a lobster dinner or something or spent like 1,400, I like
It's
that's great. That's
it's not the
awesome.
crime of the century.
That,
It's
that's
not the
that's
crime
helping.
of the
That's literally
century.
helping like local business, right? Like you are
It's
stimulating the
helping
local
exactly.
economy. Like that's it. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
No. That's
I mean, that's my take on it. That well, it's wasteful spending, It's
yeah.
like give me a break
Like
because someone put it in their bank account. Like I mean, who cares? Who cares? It's not the crime of the
yeah,
century.
like the only time like when like they like it would become an issue is like if people are literally going to torpedo like the rest of like a bill that needs to be passed just for like maybe like $600 extra to them. That would be like my only like that would be
Yeah.
like okay,
And of course
stimulus checks are awesome, but they're not the
and
most.
of course I'm just speaking from a perspective cuz I hope it was Paul Krugman. Um
I like I said
Someone
I've
said, and just so they're in a position of they're not trying to get a bill across, they're literally just advocating for or against, and just it was basically a cost analysis, how really when you spend this much, really it's a loss, blah 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 blah. But
yeah.
anyway,
I
I
would like again. I would just say like I want to look into like the whole Krugman thing because like the only thing I know about Krugman on stimulus is like when him just being like, they don't really do anything. And it's like whatever.
well, if
Maybe
that's
they do,
what
maybe they
he
don't. Like
said, then
that
then
was like in
that's
reference to
what
like
I'm talking about. If that is what he said, then that's what I'm talking about. If when you say stimulus, it doesn't really do anything. Look at the savings rate, look at the GDP. Let's forget that I know as an academic that the main thing you're measuring with GDP is the actual well-being of people. So, yeah, I just think I don't know. I hope it was him. We will look back
yeah,
and
I will
find out
probably
who this
have.
culprit is. And
We'll find
this
this
is why you
rogue
got to stay
academic
tuned
who's
for the
against
next podcast.
stimulus. We're gonna find him. He hates it when people get digits worth of zeros.
Yeah, so we will bring him to justice. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you listen to the next podcast. So what were we doing next? Was that the Dave Rubin?
Next is Dave Rubin and Glenn Beck's phenomenal advice on what these COVID mask restrictions or lack thereof now really means.
And can you just share your screen just
Uh,
so
yeah, sure.
has become almost like a yellow star. So many people on the liberal side see the mask as a sign that you're part of the party, and when you're not wearing a mask, you're a problem. and they've been shaming us. They've been side-eyeing us, speaking out, calling us names. How do they remove that mask? Because it has become part of the identity of the party.
Well, Glenn, that goes directly to the danger that they've been doing for years now, which was calling us all racists and bigots and Nazis. And I know that you personally, Glenn, you've gotten into hot water from the lefty media at times for making the Nazi analogy. And I completely agree with you on this. When you make the Nazi analogy, I mean, the irony is these are the people who call all of us Nazis, but the Nazis didn't just show up one day. It didn't just show up one day. It is a process of othering people, saying the worst things about people. And now it's not just that our political views are odious and should be silenced and kicked off big tech and everything else. It's that we are literally killing people by not wearing masks, by not bowing to these people. And who's actually the ones that are instigating the hate? It's them. You want to wear a mask? Wear a mask. You want to get vaccinated? Get vaccinated. That's all on you. Live your life.
And you can be pro-vaccination and be vaccinated and pro-mask and still have that point of view.
Sure.
I mean,
sure, but that's
they don't
because,
think so.
Well, because because we respect individual rights. We respect freedom and liberty, and what they respect is power and control. But I think you're making a good point. You know, this is one of those, people get very upset when people make any sort of Nazi reference or Holocaust reference coming, say, from our side, even though they do it all the time. But yes, at some point it becomes you've othered people into they're not even people anymore. And what do you do with those not people?
So
Okay. Oh boy. Where is this Discord?
Minute to recover from that.
Oh. I saw that like literally 2 hours ago, but like, oh my God.
So I guess the gist is just they're comparing the having to wear a mask to Nazi Germany.
But now they're saying, but like, okay, so like like oh my God. So yeah, so like,
I mean, that's just a little insulting to people who actually, like, I guess, has family
family
that
who
suffered
died.
in concentration camps.
I'm
and
actually
you have
very
to wear
curious
a
if
fucking mask.
Dave Rubin
Wait, can I
falls into that
curse?
group. Yeah, probably. I've said the F word before. Like, why not?
Okay.
I put not made for children. It's okay.
Okay, cool.
But okay. Oh my gosh. So like there is a lot to unpack there. Like when you sent me that text like earlier, you're like, I'm like, yeah, this is actually so true. Because like at first they start off, we're like, how are they gonna reconcile with not wearing masks anymore? Masks have become such a huge part of their identity. And it's like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about?
Well, and this is just an observation I've had, like, before even COVID happens, is like, everything, like, so some people on the left, they have a certain ideology, and some people on the right, and they have a certain ideology, and so you vote for Republican, and they vote for Democrat, but then it's like, all, like a mask, like, what does that have to do with small, I guess there is a small government big argument there, but there's
like,
just a lot.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
He would be like, because like when they brought up individual liberties, here would be like my question: what do you think about drunk driving?
Right.
Don't you infringe on my liberty when you tell me that I can't drive down the road with a 2.0 blood alcohol level? I'm not going to hurt anyone. That's for other people. I know my right, and I take personal responsibility for what happens. If I crash my car, that's on me. If I catch COVID, that's on me.
Right.
However, you don't have the right to endanger other people's lives.
Right.
And when you're driving that car drunk, you can hurt other people. You can.
It's a negative externality.
Exactly.
Right?
And that is where personal responsibility should come into play.
Right. Right, exactly. So if you believe in personal responsibility, and of course, you're and how are, you're responsible then for getting other people sick. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
It
you
seems
are. Like,
so that should just go along with the personal responsibility, right? But it just shows you that it's just weird in our culture. Any situation can come up. Cardi B's song.
oh my God,
Okay,
what? Oh my God.
I guess everything is based in, but it just seems like, of course, automatically, if you believe in small government, then Cardi B's song is bad. And if you believe in, then I like Cardi B's song. Or there's just all these things where I'm always just like, people just fall in line with
Yeah,
their
I feel like,
whoever else is in politics with that. You get
yeah,
what I'm trying to point
I
at
think it's
here?
because like people, especially in like first world countries or like people like who are like very probably privileged, only because I'm only guessing because of like Twitter's demographics. I think a lot of people develop like parasocial like relationships with other people, or at least with like whatever ideology. So like for instance, I think like right wingers kind of have like a sense of community when they go onto Twitter and they like own the libs. And I think left wing people get have like a good sense of community when they drop the guillotine in front of Jeff Bezos's house, which is kind of funny, but like it's like kind of scary too at the same time. But like I
Yeah.
feel like because like they do identify so strongly with this, when like one random person randomly says this is what the left believes, a lot of people are gonna like, oh, this is what the left believes. Yeah, totally. Like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll take it. I trust them. Like the left is pretty cool. Or like this is what the right believe. They're like, yeah, the right has never steered me wrong before.
And so,
That's
right, so and
why.
so I really believe everyone would have wore a mask had it just not been
Been
a
somehow,
Republican versus Democrat issue, you
and
know?
that's like the issue with like the hyper polarization in our country that like freaking political scientists are still trying to like wrap their head around. They're like, how do we deal with this? How do we fix this? Because yeah, this pandemic has shown, oh my gosh, even saving lives has become a partisan issue.
And I wonder what would happen if we could get in a time machine and go back before COVID, just round up like, a bunch of people and just poll them. Are you a Republican or a Democrat? Or what would you think if there was this scenario? And then maybe one of them is like, what would you think if
If
there
there
was
was
a
a deadly,
disease
if
going around and everyone had to get sick? And I wonder like how people would answer that compared to
or
how they
like
would answer that now.
or like here's maybe how I would like frame it. What if the Spanish flu came back? Because it seems like
Right.
when you look
Okay.
back on like historical events, and we had, or like, what if the Spanish flu came back and we had to implement the same policies that we did back then in order to stop the spread of it? Do you think we should do that? You would probably get a lot of people from both sides. Probably they wouldn't know what the hell those policies were, but they would probably say, yeah, I would agree with that
I think you would get more people than you would get
right now.
now
Yeah,
after a year
you
of
absolutely would.
brainwashing. And of course, I do think there would be people on the left, who, it could go the other way a little bit too. But I do think that more people would say that
Yeah, I think
you
the
know,
issue is like the thing is the dogma that the left believes in, at least in this case, saves lives.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe in the very beginning it would have messed over like hospital workers if they just kept on buying all the masks. Like there were like certain like shortages before, right? Or like in the very
right.
beginning, like. But like other than that, yeah, that's like kind of the philosophy behind it. Like one is like I'm like F you, I have mine, and the other is like, well, okay, I guess if like it's a duty that like I have to like try to help or like stop the spread, and I'm trying to like do like my individual part.
Yeah. And I think no matter how people feel about the mask, I think one thing is true is that them here comparing that to
To
like
a
Nazi
Jewish
Germany,
star
who agrees with that? Who
who
agrees with that,
and
really?
like again, like they're talking about how they're being the real historical ones, but like no, like that's
Yeah.
not how like the laws were like started. They did not start off with like the Jewish star. They did not start off by like silencing Jewish speech. They like first started off by like
It all started with one mask one day.
yeah.
Someone had to put on a mask. And then from there, it just went.
Look, oh, I made this little star in arts and crafts, and I just thought, oh, wouldn't it look so nice on all the Judean population? Next thing I know, there's a bunch of stars, and now we get to know who's Judean, who's not Judean. I think it's a pretty win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And like, sure, when they say like, I would agree with them when they say like, I think the left probably uses the term fascist a little bit too much. It probably uses Nazi a little bit too much. But
Yeah.
like, that doesn't excuse anything.
Y'all do.
Yeah, like that does not excuse comparing masks to protect lives to literally dehumanizing acts or policies that were meant to dehumanize
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead. Finish that thought.
Oh yeah, I guess like to their point where they're like, I feel like because like again, like I just want to put like all their points. The fear of the other that they were trying to say to like instill. Like, sure, that's pretty bad, but this is also coming from people who constantly instill fear of the other when it comes to like immigrants or refugees.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what news is based off of. That's where the ratings are.
That's where and that's where their audience is. And and again, like, I'm sorry if you feel dehumanized for putting other people at risk, but are you dehumanized when you are told not to drink and drive? Are people who have
Right.
gotten DUIs, are they ostracized from like, yeah, they are ostracized, but like rightfully so. They took a huge risk and in some cases have probably seriously hurt people.
And another thing they can do, like, so I mean, right now for Republicans, you can show, so they're so concerned with freedom, but of course, you know, they can arrest a journalist in Julian Assange, or try and prosecute Edward Snowden, or Chelsea Manning, or even reality winners, for those of you who are aware of that story. So yeah, there's all sorts of things. Well, like, well, how about the prosecution of whistleblowers and journalists? So it's just like, I don't know. There are things going on where I feel like if you really had these stances of liberty, because they can always oscillate between liberty and then also tough, harsh authoritarianism, journalists arrested, Edward Snowden banished, you know, so they can always oscillate between I'm for freedom and I'm for toughness, and you know, you can
Yeah.
always oscillate between those two things.
Yeah. Like like the only like excuse I can like maybe somewhat come up with is just like therefore like nation security over like everything else. But like even then, like I feel like I hear people bring up like the Ben Franklin quote of like, you can have security, but you're gonna have to sacrifice liberty for it. Like
Yeah, so and really, I just think that whole ideology, you know, I spent a lot of my college years just debating right wingers. I don't do that as much now. I mostly debate people on the left, like Adam, just because, you know,
it's
it's
more fun.
more of a thorough conversation, and
I
it's just,
agree.
I can assume that you're gonna start at a certain level of
Like
knowing what's
we're
going on.
agreeing on reality. That's like something like as a person who like constantly argues with his grandfather because my grandfather likes it. He's actually like spoken how much he likes like arguing with me because I'm like the only person who will like actually talk back to him. Um, I it I wish I liked it more. It's just not fun because like we're not starting from like the same world,
No.
and
Yeah.
like it's not that I'm like afraid of the other side. It's just like I just can't. It's like I don't have the spaceship to go to his world, or I don't have like the teleporter.
Also, isn't there this fact that one side is sort of arguing do nothing, government don't do anything. So therefore, every argument can come down to should you do this thing or shouldn't you do this thing, right? And it always
Yeah.
comes down to a big government, small one. So every argument just sort of feels the same. Where I feel like sort of on the left is we're gonna do something. Should we do it this way or
Or
should
that
we
way.
do it
So,
that
like for
way?
instance, like universal programs versus means-tested programs is oftentimes a huge debate among the left. Or should we, or do you sacrifice like idealistic values for pragmatic realities? Like these are usually constantly at the heart of like most of the debates and like differences between like people among the left. Not saying that there probably is, like there is totally like differences between like right leaning people. Like I've personally like I discuss, I still talk to like a lot of, I have a lot of conservative friends. I have a lot of like moderate friends who I discuss politics with. There is totally differences of between like right leaning people, but like at the same time, like I always find that like the differences in conversation is just not equal. I always feel like I always get like more interesting, or like I feel like I have to like be more prepared whenever I'm talking, whenever like I'm like on someone with like my own like ideological camp. It's weird. And like
Yeah.
that sounds so
Right.
conceited, or that makes me like I feel like that just makes it sound like I'm so like afraid of like the other side or whatever. But it's like I have honestly tried, and I don't shy away. Like
But yo, and you know
and
what
I
we
think I
should
can
do?
make like good conservative arguments too. Like honestly, like if I wanted to, I could probably I think I can make the conservative arguments, or like I can try to like bridge a tunnel if they're like somewhat close.
Yeah. And also I think that too, like when you are debating about anything, but mostly if you are debating someone on the right, like and this gets said a lot, but like of course you have to acknowledge the little things that of course they are right about because
Hmm.
you know that's really is the only way you're gonna ever change someone's mind.
Like here's like one thing that like I think for instance like a sense of community is probably really good, and is probably something
Yeah,
that like should not be laughed at. Um,
sure. Yeah.
I think like maybe like even to an extent like as a person who's like a hardcore atheist, and like in the past like I used to be like a lot more very anti-religion. I've come around like as I got older to like more like okay, if people actually need religion in order
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
be a better
I've
person,
seen
or
people who live good, straight
like
lives
yeah,
who just
I've
love it and their family and they all do it and they all, oh, they love it. So
yeah,
it's like,
and
you
they
know
like
what?
meet their
Let them
friends, and
do
they're
that.
good and they have like a good strong bond with like various members in their community, and like that is something that is like super important, that I'm like okay, that's something I probably have to work my butt off in order to get the equivalent, because I'm not going to go to church. I'm not even going to think about it. Um,
And actually this is a good topic. Like I'm sort of glad you brought this up because this also I think sort of veers us into like this is just something I've sort of figured out over time. You can agree or disagree. Let me know. But I think sort of when you look at the problem, right? And right wingers always do this, right? We'll point to like marginalized, like you know African Americans and you know all those groups. We'll point to that, and they'll always say, "Well, what about Asians?" You know, and they always say that, and they always come out with their Asian stats and how you know they had to build railroads and all that sort of thing. And I think it comes down to what you're talking about here about family. And so I do think one of the reasons that sort of these that you know Asian and maybe people from like the Indian culture or that sort of area, they maintain a good family. A lot of them are religious. This isn't to say that oh they're somehow better because of course we can look at things like the schools and how we arrest black people at an unproportionate level, and you can look at reasons for it's not because certain people are inferior that their families aren't kept together more,
mhm.
but it's more rather because of the external circumstances for sure. But it is just to point out that part of the way that you bring people sort of out of poverty, and that's why we are on the left, right? Because like poverty is something that sort of concerns us in some way. So then, of course, to do that, no, not even sort of, you do have to embrace the family on some level.
Yeah, I will actually say that like I think like an interesting stat that I learned like I think like last year, like 2 years ago. I don't have the reference offhand, but like it's like if you look at like Asian communities, or like who came like between like 18 for like during the time of like those railroads, versus like Asian Americans who came over like the Cold War era, there is actually
Sure.
like a huge difference in like their outcomes and whatnot. Like that is like an interesting discrepancy that like kind of exists within like
Yeah.
the Asian American population, and that's mainly because like for instance like during the Cold War, like we were heavily incentivizing like Asian immigration into like the United States through like various programs, to like either help people who were fleeing from communist countries or whatnot, and like
Yeah.
offered like really robust and like one of the biggest issues when it came to like black immigrant, and slaves who came over, African like black people, African Americans who came over, they came over with
Uh,
nothing for a
right.
hundred years,
Right.
weren't able for hundreds of years weren't allowed to have a paycheck
Yeah.
for 50 or like, oh crap, no, that was like close to another 100 years afterwards. uh, they're barely making any money. They're not allowed to go like, contribute to like white business for like a large swath of like where like the black population is. It's like, well, yeah, no one, like, yeah, like literally,
Yeah.
like there are people who were growing up in Jim Crow who are like only 60 years old. Does that math work out? Yeah, that math works out. Who were born under Jim
Right.
Crow. Like that's not
And
ancient. It's
so
not ancient history at
so
all.
I think it shows like it's not anyone. So I mean, yeah, like on a societal level, there's a lot of
Also,
one parent homes. The fathers are in jail for a lot of the times non-violent drug crimes, and
yep.
like you said, all that history. So I mean, it is the point that I think part of the way we can help these communities is, yeah, like they need a community, they need a family.
And like the
And
thing
how
is,
about
like
these
the black
families where
community,
the grandmother lives with you? It's not just your mom, dad, brother, sister. It's like the whole family, and then it makes work easier, and people can rely on each other, and there's more teamwork, and there's also more care. Like there's more care how people are raised, and there's more people to watch you, and there's more people to take care of it. So I just think, there is a level where like, you do have to like promote family at some point.
yeah. And like the thing is, it's like technically like the black community is like super, super in touch. And like weirdly enough, it's like middle class white people who are like the most disconnected when it comes to like a sense of community and even like a sense of family. Like I think like on average.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
which like
Go
honestly,
ahead.
from my lived experience, I agree.
Yeah. And I think most people would agree with that. And it's just something that I think gets lost on the wayside. And I also think part of the reason for that is because Republicans run around family, family, family all the time. That's
But
like
then
one of
like
their
constantly
values.
institute policies that destroy family, family, family.
Sure, but
Like
then it's harder for people on the left to go, no, families, we need to focus on families,
yeah.
because then people are going, whoa, what does that mean? You just want to implement all these policies that don't focus on families, like
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Or it's like, what about all the single parents out there? And it's like,
Yeah,
wait, what like,
that's exactly what we're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be from the Dave Rubin perspective.
yeah. And like, that's like probably like one thing that like, there's like, it always seems as though like, because of how like micro and scale like right wing thought is, I feel like it's always like and like, I'm not even saying that to be like jib or anything or like glib. Like, I'm saying that to mean like, that's actually a very powerful rhetorical tool because everyone, like, whenever like conservatives talk about like what conservative values is, everyone technically lives those experiences or has like some idea of like what those are. So like when we talk about like the idea of the family or the idea of the community and whatnot, like Yeah, that's like a good point, and that is like some rhetoric that like I feel like because like left ideas are just like left wing ideas are just so large in scale and complex and like intersectional, where it's like, well, technically when we're talking about racism, we can talk about all these various different factors. Technically, when we're talking about gender, we can talk about all of these various factors. Like everyone needs like a freaking college degree just to like begin the conversation.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like with
Yeah.
like right wing ideas, it's like, hey, you know that thing, that unit, or like these like concepts that have been like with you your entire life? That's what we're for. And it's like,
A
oh,
caveman instinct. Yeah.
yeah.
That's sort of right. Um. Yeah. So.
Honestly,
Yeah.
that
So
was
I
a
mean
very interesting tangent.
that's. So I guess that watching Dave Rubin and who was that? Glenn Beck.
That was Glenn Beck. Oh my God. Have you ever seen, oh my gosh, YouTube Glenn Beck chalkboard? It is hilarious. He used to have a show on Fox News. My grandparents used to watch him a lot, and he was crazy. Even when I was like 10 years old, I'm like, this dude's funny, but he's not on a comedy show.
See, when I was 10, I never would have been aware enough to realize that there's even such a disagreement. I probably would have heard what he said and said, because everyone, when they're talking, makes what they're saying sound like a reasonable thing.
Unless you're Glenn Beck, honestly. Like, again, like I'm saying that as
Okay,
a
yeah,
person
maybe,
from like a conservative,
yeah,
yeah, right.
yeah.
So,
I would like to see what I would have thought of that
yeah.
when I was 10, or maybe a little older, like 12.
But yeah, honestly, who would have thought like a thought-provoking conversation actually would have came from like a Dave Rubin clip?
Always, man. You always gotta pull the.
Dude, like
You always gotta
it's the
pull some.
marketplace
You
of
always gotta take a
ideas.
lesson.
Like
The
he's letting us
marketplace of
in.
ideas.
That's it. Oh my gosh. He is the ideas guy.
But,
I,
all right.
I
Well,
think we should call it. That was
yeah.
it. So thank you every single person for listening. If you like this, be sure to share it on your social media. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit that like. If you hated it, tell us why in the comments below. If you want to argue, don't worry. We're ready. We're ready. And always remember to have a nice day and have some good conversations. Don't be afraid to butt
Canada.
heads.